All right, and moving onward and forward, introducing the next presentation and topic. The title alone certainly gave me pause to think about. Give away your identity for a Web3 cookie, a privacy-preserving Web3 identifying identity layer. I'd like to welcome Daniel Kelleher, VP of Engineering at Civic Technologies.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Bop. Yeah. Hey, yeah, I hooked you in with the meme title there. Blockchain Week, it's great. It's really great to be here right at the start of the week, close to the start of the week anyway, because I'm going to talk about identity. And identity kind of is the bedrock or underpins quite a lot of other discussions in Web3, in blockchain in general. So I'm hoping it will kind of feed through to the rest of the discussions this week as we all have them in other spaces. And I'm also very pleased to see that the other speakers today are we're all circling around the general same area. We're all kind of looking at the same sphere from various parts outside. So that's very encouraging. But so I'm Daniel Kelleher. All the stuff has been moved over to the side there, and that's in that slide. That's a bit, we'll see how the rest of the slides turn out. But I've been in the space for like 4 or 5 years now, identity at Civic and crypto, blockchain in general. Over the last while, I feel like we've got a bit of a problem with wallets. I really like wallets. Wallets are self-sovereign, right? I don't have to go to Facebook or to Google to ask them to issue me a wallet. I issue it to myself. And I think that's really the crux or the kernel of crypto, of blockchain and Web3. And in that regard, it's a good basis for identity. It's self-sovereign. However, we are using them as identifiers, right? We're logging in with wallets, we're filling in forms and putting our wallet's addresses on them, we're having tokens issued to wallets, and then we're proving ownership of those tokens by connecting our wallets, etc., etc. And that's where it starts to become a problem for me, because I see that's a shaky foundation for an identity layer on Web3. And if we don't do something about that shaky foundation, we're going to build more and more things on top of it, and the whole thing will just be wobbly. It has 2 main issues, really, for me. Wallets as an identifier. The first is account recovery, and the second is privacy. So when it comes to account recovery, I mean, we're used to, in the space of, in Web2 world, being able to contact someone when we've lost our password or our password has been we're used to being able to go to someone and say, hey, give me my account back, right? And in Web3, we've tended to just kind of do away with that and say, your keys, your problem. Not always, but by and large. And that's a barrier to entry, I think, for a lot of people that aren't used to that cryptography and aren't used to engineering, managing private keys in general. The second problem when it comes to privacy, so used to, in Web2 worlds, having this distinction between a public profile that we expressly post things to and some modicum of private information, as long as we're willing to accept the private means stored on some server owned by one of the FANG companies, Facebook again, and Google, Twitter, and so on. In Web3, we've rejected that definition of privacy. And as a result, we're living in a kind of a 2-dimensional world, a dichotomy between pure anonymity, just operating as your public key, and pure openness and publicity. Everything open and discoverable through our wallets. Because we have defined our identities as a set of tokens, effectively. So tokens over the last couple of years have really changed their definition to a large extent. Previously, tokens were just a symbol of value, and crypto in general, or blockchain, was a financial domain. Blockchain is now more of a social domain, or at least both, financial and social. And we've started to take the token concept from the financial domain and just plant it straight on top of the social domain. So we have NFTs that represent our identities. Profile pictures are just the start of it, right? Proof of attendance tokens to say we attended an event or a party, membership to DAOs or other communities, governance tokens indicating that we voted and so on. All of this is discoverable purely from your wallet. And a lot of people are fine with that, but I think that it means that we have a very big problem, as other speakers today have been speaking about, in how to both store information securely in a decentralized manner, how to discover that information. All in all, wallets are not good identifiers. They're not good base layer for identity for these two reasons: account recovery and privacy. And Web3 needs an identity layer. So, at Civic, we've been building on some standards and emerging standards and contributing to those standards in order to build an identity layer for Web3. And we're basing it all on the DID, or the decentralized identifier, as a base standard. That's one of the few standards that everybody in the decentralized identity space agrees on without controversy. And we're building an identity layer on that. And from that DID, you can discover wallets, and you can also discover a decentralized data store. And that actually goes quite a long way to solving the two issues that I talked about immediately. I should mention that the DIDs that we're using for our platform, our implementation of this standard, are on-chain. So they're discoverable on-chain just the same way as a wallet is. So they're also self-sovereign. Like I said, that's the one big plus about using wallets as an identity layer, is that they're self-sovereign. If you have private key material, you have a wallet. And if you have private key material, you have a DID. In fact, if you have private key material, you have a DID without even realizing it. It's just a simple one-to-one kind of connection. But the difference is you can also attach other wallets to this DID. And those connections are discoverable on-chain. That means if you lose one, you can recover your account, you can recover your identity through possession of the other one, or more. And in fact, that allows later on for more sophisticated forms of account recovery, for example, through social recovery or trusted third-party recovery services that will also hold a key for you. So it sort of bootstraps a more familiar, comfortable, safe Web2 experience in a decentralized manner, purely on-chain. The other issue regarding privacy is also, to a large extent, solved by this model through the discovery of the data store. So the store is split up into essentially two parts, a private and a public component. And you can effectively store arbitrary data there. The private component, typically we use verifiable credentials, which is another standard or emerging standard, close to standard, way of storing private information in a way that is kind of shareable with others. But that's just part of the private store. You can also store any arbitrary data there. And the public store is made up of a few components. It's made up, again, of arbitrary data stored but discoverable through your DID. So the general flow would be you give someone your DID, they resolve it to find the store, and then they follow the links in the store to find your public information. But just like with wallets, you can resolve the DID to find a set of wallets, and those wallets will point you to tokens, NFTs, and passes, which is something I'm going to talk about in a moment. So you can see it's a much richer concept of identity than you have if you just have wallets pointing to tokens. But that richness comes with complexity. So in Civic's case, we're kind of hiding almost all of this behind a product that we're calling Civic.me. So you can use Civic.me right now if you have a Solana account, because we're starting on Solana. If you have, by Solana account, I mean a wallet on Solana, right? If anyone has a Solana wallet, go to Civic.me, connect it up, have a look around. It effectively just provides a familiar concept to a lot of people, a public profile and private profile. That public profile is largely made up of what you might expect from a Web3 identity layer right now, which is a list of all your NFTs. But it also has this idea of the Civic Pass. And I want to talk about that now for a moment. So the last speaker talked about this a little bit, and I think the first speaker as well, especially at Ruby, the idea of of regulation-ready smart contracts. We issue Civic passes. Civic passes allow smart contracts to control access based on certain properties, real-world properties of the user. And we do that using tokens, specifically soul-bound tokens, or tokens that are associated with an identity rather than being transferable. So these are non-transferable tokens, but they are tokens. And that comes back to the privacy aspect that I spoke about at the start. We are kind of running as a space head first into issuing tokens for all sorts of information in order to make it available to smart contracts. And there has been obviously a lot of debate on the subject in the last few months. I think Evan McMullen's going to be speaking to you all later, and she has strong opinions on this, which I largely agree with. The point of Civic.me is that you don't have to store your information as tokens, you don't have to store them as verifiable credentials, but when you do want to take an aspect of your identity and store it as a token, we have a protocol called Gateway Protocol on which Civic Pass is based, which does that to maximize privacy and security for the end user. I won't go into too much detail about Civic Pass now, but we can talk about it a little bit more afterwards if you're interested, or take a look at civic.com for more details. Now, I know that in the room and probably at home as well, there are quite a lot of people that are builders, that are integrating, and I want to give you a bit of an idea of how best to do that. And it really depends on what category you fall in, because these protocols and these platforms that we're building are designed, they're only valuable really when they are integrated with other platforms, right? So if you are a dApp, it's quite straightforward. The Civic.me profile has this SDK. You can integrate it into your dApp to allow people to show their profile pic, their username, and other profile information directly in your dApp. So take a look at Civic.me for that. If you're a smart contract protocol, you might be interested in being regulation-ready, DeFi protocols that want to, for example, we have examples on Solana of DeFi protocol that is gating users, that making sure that traders are not in OFAC sanctioned countries in order to allow market makers to join in ways that they previously couldn't or didn't feel safe doing so. We've also integrated with NFT mints to provide bot resistance, very rudimentary bot resistance, kind of no private information exposed, in order to avoid mints being completely wiped out by bots in the first 10 seconds. And also, you might have region or age gating. You might want to have a protocol, a DAO, that wants to limit to a certain region, or over 18 if it's adult content, and that sort of thing. For all of those use cases and similar, actually, usable identity is a very important part of that. I think this was also spoken about in the first talk, the idea that you will go through a KYC process, and that information will be stored in a verifiable credential in your private profile, and then reusable in the form of a Civic Pass on protocols that need it. Yes, so if that applies to you, go to civic.com and look at Civic Pass. You might be a DAO, and I think that in DAO's cases, you might want both. So we're working again on Solana with the standard protocol for DAOs, which is called Realms, and there we've added proof of personhood pass, which allows you to, for example, set up a DAO that has something other than one token, one vote, plutocratic voting. Again, the last speaker spoke about this, I think, a little bit as well. So this allows for things like quadratic voting. This allows for things like one person, one vote, pure democratic voting, and lots more. But a DAO might have a UI where you might want to interact with the members of the DAO, communicate with them, discuss things, just literally see how people have voted. And for that, you need a public profile. So the Civic.me profile SDK is the thing to use there. So DAOs really fall into both categories, I would say. To summarize then, wallets are not sufficient as an identity primitive. Web3 needs a new identity layer based on standards. Civic uses the following standards: decentralized identifiers, verifiable credentials, IPFS, and others, including the gateway protocol for Civic Pass. The two end-user-facing products that we have, or business-facing products that we have, Civic Me for users, and Civic Pass for protocols, organizations, and so on. And if any of those are you, then take a look at docs.civic.com for more information. But also, here comes the slightly wonky slide again, that says Dan Kelleher. So take those two letters and stick them on the end of there. And also Civic Key for more, just continuing the conversation on Twitter, on Telegram, or elsewhere. It really is a conversation that benefits. It's a kind of a positive sum game, right? The more people are involved, the more it benefits everybody, even people that aren't involved. So please add your voice. It's a very interesting discussion. I think it's not one that has, it's certainly not one that's closed. So you remember the amount of times I said emerging standard rather than established standard. So please join in, and thanks very much for listening this morning.
Excellent presentation. And now moving on to our brief Q&A. Any questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Yeah, hello. I'm Ricardo. I have a sort of a basic question. How do you see the decentralized identity environment moving forward for the end user? Let's say 10 years from now. And how is it going to be? Am I going to have to make choices, which service I'm going to use for decentralized identity, and why? How is this going to be?
I'd like to think of it more like, the choice of wireless broadband router that you pick, rather than the choice of like whether you have your identity on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. You don't have a second thought when you go in to buy a wireless router of whether it's going to work with your particular Ethernet or work with your particular mobile phone or whatever. It follows standards, and those standards have been imposed top-down by governments. And I think that that's already starting to happen in the decentralized identity world. So especially in Germany, one of the leading countries for this, the governments are getting very strongly behind DIDs and other emerging standards in the decentralized identity space. So to answer your question directly, the end user won't really need to know so much. Things will hopefully be compatible with each other. If you have your decentralized identity that was created for you through civic.me, it should work as a decentralized identity consumer on another platform. You have the same choices when you go into a hardware store to decide which wireless router to decide. You won't be limited by, your initial choice won't limit you to opportunities later. I hope.
Yes.
So one question, is there any serious competition right now? Or, for example, Luxo?
Yeah, I won't go into too many details right now because we're running out of time, but lots of competition, or also known as collaboration possibilities. So the Decentralized Identity Foundation is a good place to start in getting a list of all the people in the space. And yeah, it is an interesting situation. Like Civic, we've been in the business for a long time. Our main competitor is Web2. And they're kind of big, they're kind of scary. So we have to find a way to make the space palatable to people who are used to that sort of experience and safe to people. And that's what I think a lot of the companies in the space are devoting the majority of the energy into doing, rather than squabbling amongst themselves. We have made the choice about a couple of years ago at Civic to start focusing less on bringing Web2 companies, or non-Web3 companies, I should say, into Web3, and rather focusing on providing identity solutions for the Web3 space. And that's why my talk is about saying, stop using wallets as wallets as an identifier. Start using something richer than that. We spend a lot of our time convincing Web3 organizations that that's the right thing to do. We find that works better because Web3 organizations already have this, and users already have this concept of self-sovereignty through the wallet. There's already this resistance to storing data on third-party servers that they don't control. So it's an easier sell, but it's still something we have to go out and sell.
Thanks.
Excellent. And on a final note there, I believe there was one last quick remark from the gentleman in the front.
Yeah, I can.
Maybe it's a bit naive, and maybe it depends on how you understand identity, but government-issued identities are usually unique, be it for persons or for companies. There's just one. I have my social security number, the company has the registry number. I can make as many wallets as I want. So there is a huge difference here. How is that issue tackled with DIDs?
So you can have as many DIDs as you want, and that's by design. A government-issued ID would map more accurately to a verifiable credential. So you would have an ID that was issued to a particular. You'd have an ID that was issued by the government. Now, governments don't issue them to a particular DID. Maybe they will one day. You have to present them and hold them, and but you can still convert them into a verifiable credential that is signed by the government. That verifiable credential is then unique. There's only one of them with that particular signature. So even if you share it around multiple DIDs, and then you present, let's say you want to do a Sybil attack, and you present that verifiable credential to some protocol, that protocol will go, okay, that's fine. The verifiable credential doesn't say that this DID doesn't own this doesn't own it, because government doesn't issue it to DIDs yet. But I've already seen this one by this did over here, and that sort of thing. So it does work, but in an ideal world, the government would issue verifiable credentials to a DID or an array of DIDs instead.
I think the EU is having a pilot project in the works about this somewhere, but it's not near.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, like I said in the previous question, it's kind of the things are moving in that direction, especially in Europe.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll hold on. Excellent presentation, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Very much.